something that I say along the way will touch you. I know it. Let's begin that process of crafting a meaningful life.
Here's Mary Crafts.
Welcome, my friends, and welcome back to Crafting a Meaningful Life. I'm Mary Crafts, and this is number 240 podcast. This guest is so fortunate to be on this momentous occasion. 240 weeks we've been talking about how to craft a meaningful life. That's appropriate. Genuflect, please. Scott, welcome.
Well, as a Catholic, I'm used to genuflecting, so it's very easy.
I know. That's why I used that reference. Wasn't I appropriate?
Thank you.
So we talk about so many different things on this podcast. There are so many things that go into crafting that life that we want, that we know we were born to live. And that's why I talk about things from this far end of the spectrum to this far end of the spectrum to everything in between, because it's all part of who we are. So we jumped from last week and talking about, I had two experts on self-care, to talking with Scott Miller. And just briefly, Scott works for FranklinCovey. He's their senior Yahoo over there. He runs a podcast, and his podcast, can I just say, is the largest. This is embarrassing for me with 20,000 listeners. He runs the largest business-oriented podcast in the world. All right, in the world. Millions of people follow him. And you are going to get to hear him today. So Scott, welcome back. This is your second time on my podcast.
That's an honor in and of itself. Mary Crafts, I'm a charter member of your fan club. I so admire your perseverance, your abundance mindset, how well you mentor people. I've been a raving fan of yours for years. Looking forward to helping support your own book when it launches in the coming year.
Yeah. In the next month.
Honored. The next month. I'm honored to be here. I will be at that launch party bringing a case of Veuve Clicquot chilled, ready to roll. I'll supply the champagne.
That. I will bring the saber.
You got it. Good, because I can't.
Did you know that? I do that. I have saber.
Of course.
Yeah, what else is new?
It doesn't surprise me at all that you can saber a champagne bottle.
Yeah. So this was my story about sabering champagne. I had taught people how to do this for decades when I was in the catering business, because every groom wanted to saber, at those high-end weddings, wanted to saber his own champagne bottle. So I was teaching it nonstop. I knew all the technique. I'd been to a class on it. And when it came my turn to finally saber my own bottle at my own birthday party, I was like, oh my gosh, let's hope if there's a God in heaven, this works.
I hope it wasn't a bottle of Dom or Krug. Oh, it did work out. Good. Okay, good.
It was Vu.
Okay, good.
All right, we digress. See, Scott and I not only are in the podcast world, but we're also dear friends. And so when we haven't seen each other, we just spend most of the time just talking about this.
I'm a raving fan of Mary Crafts.
And you know how oftentimes we talk on this podcast about you are the sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And I don't always know if that's the 5 people that I like Scott, he has a wife and 3 children. So that's 5 right there. He's like them, that's them. But I live alone. And so, yes, there's John, but it's not just who I spend physical time with. It's who I spend time with emotionally, mentally, intellectually, who I'm reading about, who do I fill my life with in books that I read or something I watch. Those people influence us. And if you think they don't, it's time to realize how that, if you're spending every single night watching some, gory thing on TV or, CSS crime scene, sorry if you're a fan, that's what you're going to be thinking about. And I want to fill my life with the richest possible resources. And that's why Scott is here, because you are one of the richest possible resources that I have in my life.
Well, that's gracious of you. It will sound like a cliche. I feel the same way. I have learned so much from you. You've been a mentor to me informally for many years now. The connections you have provided for me to broaden my circle of people in my life. You've connected me with politicians and business leaders and inspiring people from up and down the valley. So I feel the same way.
Speaking of which,
about you,
I have another one I want to introduce you to.
Ooh.
So I'll be contacting you about that.
Okay, good. It's not Donald Trump.
I would say, no.
Sorry, listeners. Sorry.
All right, so we digress. Scott is launching a new book, and it is Master Mentors. Now, Scott, I have been to several of your launch parties when you've launched these mentor books, and many of the mentors are there in attendance. And what I was struck with this time as I read this book and really kind of delved into it as how is this going to change my life? What am I going to learn here that's going to take something that perhaps I believed or did in the past and tweak it a little bit that my trajectory in the future is going to be different? And what an amazing opportunity you have as a mentor, but then writing about people who are your mentors. The amount of growth that you must experience from writing such a book is just, it must be off the charts. Talk to me about what it's like to produce a book with 30 people giving you the best advice you've ever heard.
Well, Mary, similar to you, like you said, I'm privileged to host a podcast. It's called On Leadership with Scott Miller. It's now the world's largest weekly leadership podcast where...
Didn't I already give that plug? I'm sorry.
I'm in marketing. I was the chief marketing officer, Mary. Don't call me out so quickly. But the reason I mentioned the podcast is because the book is, of course, based on the podcast. And so
right.
after 200 episodes, I began to realize there was so much to learn from these, Pulitzer Prize winning authors and major celebrities and business titans and people that maybe weren't famous, but perhaps they had survived some very public and unspeakable tragedy. And there was so much to learn from their forgiveness or their trauma. And like you, I'll bet on your podcast, on the one that I host, sometimes the best nuggets are off air. It's the 2 or 3 minutes in a metaphorical green room before we go live, or it's the tender debrief afterwards where you've, stopped the recording and you're uploading and they say something super powerful. So I decided about 2 years ago to start writing a book. And it's called Master Mentors. And there are going to be 10 volumes in the series, one every year. And each year I select 30 people from the 52 episodes. And with their permission, I write a short story. Think Chicken Soup for the leadership soul. Fast, easy, and breezy. This is not a academic tome or like a Jim Collins built to last or good to great kind of book. I take someone with some level of fame, but not always. I extrapolate one transformational insight from them. Sometimes it's a repeat of the transcript. Sometimes it's a repeat of an idea they shared off air, again, with their permission. And then I write a story about me, about you, about somebody else that I saw them struggle with or accomplish this insight and bring it into their life. And now I'm launching Master Mentors Volume 3 with 30 new mentors, 30 new insights on my way to number 3 next year. And it was just that. It was like you, Mary. I thought, gosh, there's so much wisdom and knowledge and insight, self-disruption that I've experienced from listening to these people. Catherine Schwarzenegger Pratt on forgiveness. Now, who better in the world knows about forgiveness than Arnold Schwarzenegger's daughter, right? And on and on and on and on. And so it's these types of people that I write about. And again, the books are very easy, very breezy, but in many ways, all of them have been mentors to me, formally, informally, and have hopefully made me a better parent, a better spouse, a better leader, better writer.
Yeah. And that's one of the things what I loved about hosting you is I have so many people who work in the self-help, motivational, inspirational world that to have you work in the business world. And yet, which of us do not need those same principles in our lives? Those principles that allow us to be leaders. And I have people say to me all the time, well, Mary, you're such a leader. You're always leading out on this or leading out on that. I'm not a leader. That's why I appreciate you because I'm just a follower. And I go, no, you are a leader in being a follower. Okay. Even though you don't think you lead, you still lead. Maybe you think you're in a relationship where the other partner is the leader and you just go along. Either way, you are a leader in that particular issue. And that they can actually, if they want to, make a shift. Now, Scott, you and I both know we don't want a world full of Scott and Marys, okay?
My wife does not want a world full of Scotts.
But
Mary's maybe, Scott's no.
yeah, well, could be. But the thing is, what in those situations, I think that our partners or those people around us, those in our families, those we work with, they want to hear our opinion. They don't want us to be silent. They want us to learn to speak up. And we become a more valuable individual to them the more we express that opinion, that thought process, why I did this, what I was thinking when I wrote this. When people open up and are willing to show the inside and to risk that, like these mentors, showing stories that they're not perfect, that for me where is the big learning. Because I'm like, oh, that's just like me. That's just like me. Yeah.
Mary, I think what you have in common with these master mentors, and it wouldn't surprise me if someday you're on this podcast as a guest and I even feature you in a future volume. In fact, you can take that to the bank right now. Because I think when it comes to leadership, you're laughing, but if you can see me on camera, I'm very serious. I fully intend to have
I
you.
see you on camera.
When your book is launched, you will be a guest on this podcast and you will be in a future Master Mentors book because you personify, and this is not me being a sycophant, you personify what I think 2022, 2023 leadership looks like, which is courage, self-disruption, vulnerability, self-awareness, transparency. You don't have, notice I didn't say ambition. I didn't say, fearlessness. Your
Powerful.
ability to turn,
Yeah.
your ability to use vulnerability as a leadership competency is a great model for us. You may know my father passed a few weeks ago, and I posted about it a lot on my social media. My brother and I were in Orlando because my father had become a hoarder later in his life and had 12 storage units. It's a quite spectacularly suffocating experience right now cleaning them out. My brother is a highly accomplished executive, former CEO of 2 Amazon companies, MBA from MIT, on and on and on. And, I like you, I have a very strong personality. I'm a leader. And yesterday I said to my brother, I don't always have to lead. Sometimes I like to follow. And we were talking about, what to do next and how many trucks and what to donate, what to sell. And I said, hey, I'm willing to follow leaders if they have a great plan. I don't always have to be the leader. And to your point about leaders and followers, I think sometimes you lead, sometimes you're following. It's a kind of a back and forth at different phases in our life. But we're all mentors to people, whether we know it or not. All of us are mentoring people in our lives. And that's why I've named the book Master Mentors, because there is something valuable to learn from everyone. In fact, I tell you, when people ask me what I look for in a mentor, I'll tell them, Mary, if I want to have a 30-year marriage, I don't go to someone who's had a 50-year marriage. I go to the guy who's had 3 marriages that have fallen apart. Because I can't replicate your genius or your success, but I can't avoid your mistakes. If I want to build a multi-million-dollar business, I don't go to the billionaire. I go to the guy or the gal that's had 3 bankruptcies. Because again, I can't replicate their genius, their intellect, their passion, their experience. I don't have their personality, their good looks like you, but I can learn from their mistakes and avoid them. I think half of mentoring is just doing what you do, is being transparent, being vulnerable, being open to say, hey, here's what worked and what didn't work for me. And by the way, here's the mess I created. Avoid that at all costs. Don't do that. I think most of mentoring is just having the courage to share your mistakes.
Absolutely. I can't even tell you how much I agree with that. I have a lot of people reach out to me to be on their business podcast. And I say to them, I'm retired. I'm no longer in business. And inevitably they ask, well, do you have a message to share for those who still are? And I'm like, oh, yeah.
Oh, on that topic, yes, right?
On that topic, yes. Because the things that I thought were helping me originally was the imposter syndrome, the, fake it till you make it thing, always appear like you're totally put together and that you really are from Salt Lake and Park City and you're really from Spanish Fork, for all that stuff that was so important for me to have this facade out there as I was building my business. And now be able to express to people, this is where I am and this is what I'm about. And I see you. My team transformed in the last 5 years I was at Culinary Crafts because I had always great culture, but I became vulnerable. And I became not the person that they were to follow necessarily because I was perfect, but because I was in the struggle and I could show them how. And this is where I was last week, and this week is better. And this is how I made that transition.
Can I pay you a compliment? I mean this sincerely. You mentioned you retired and you weren't feeling desirous or competent to be on a business podcast, which of course, eminently competent. I watched what you did during the pandemic carefully. And I watched what the business did, the business that owned by your children now. And I watched how you did not wallow in your grief, although there was a lot of grief going on in the business. Would it survive? Would it not survive? And what I saw you all do was you disrupted yourself immediately. You started doing everything possible to make sure that you could keep it together, whether it was, prepackaged Thanksgiving dinners or prepackaged Christmas dinners. The Miller family ordered both of those, whether it was you going into the business and helping, whatever it was, wash dishes, or you did all kinds of things to help them out. And you put the team to work cleaning the vans and, using the government well-deserved money for good purposes. I watched you all not wallow in enormous grief and the possibility of the fact that business might not stay around. You weren't sure, but you kept the faith. You hoped for the best. You worked your hearts out, disrupting yourselves and thinking all the different ways that it could go right. What if we did this? And what if we did that? And how about this? And I tell you, it's been an inspiration to me.
I never lost faith, Scott. I didn't. I really always believed that culinary crafts was going to survive.
I did too.
And when I retired, one of the things that I wondered is I always had this thing that I wanted the team to know there isn't anything that was below me. I could be on an event, walking around in my, great black suit and those kind of things, and still go in the back, throw an apron on and scrape dishes, bus plates out in the dining room. Actually, busing was my favorite position because you could find out how people were and could you get them anything else? How was the service this evening? All sorts of different things. I loved doing that. And to be able to come back and wash dishes. There were times I hadn't stayed to the end of an event for a long time. And a couple times in the last 5 years, when I knew the event was getting home, I went back, washed dishes, unloaded vans, that there isn't anything that I wouldn't do that I've asked them to do. And I was worried about my children because, yes, they'd worked in the business since they were 2. Okay. So they'd done it all. But now you're like, you're up here and you don't do that. And the day I showed up at the office and I saw them loading those things into people's cars, offering them a place to buy all those things that they couldn't find in the grocery store, and that they were doing it. They weren't sitting in their office. They were out there doing it themselves, picking up those 50-pound bags of flour and loading them in and helping people, taking, their credit card transaction. I knew at that moment that we were going to make it. That even though they hadn't had to do that in their life yet, that I had instilled in them the grit to see it through, and they did. So that's
you're buying 50-pound bags of flour.
Well, that's how we got them in.
I know.
So some people were like, they'd buy 50 pounds and they'd share it with their neighbors.
Yeah,
They'd give,
awesome.
Everyone like 10 pounds each. So it was that real pulling together time. Scott, as I want to talk to you just a minute though about your new book and what I got out of it. Well, just some of the things. I don't have time for all of them, but a couple things. And it goes back to what I mentioned at the very beginning, that you are the sum of the 5 people or influences or times that you spend time with. And this was such a refreshing book for me because the area of expertise that I work in now, which is not catering, but is that self-help, self-awareness type of thing. And to go back, this is the first business book that I think I've read since I retired. So it was like wow. And there was just some of them here that were so profound. Like, I hope I don't massacre his name so too bad, but Safar
Masood.
Masood, okay. And the title of his chapter was What's Next? And he had one of those life-changing experiences that we all hope we don't have to go through to change our lives, but where he was one of 2 people that survived a plane crash. Everyone else died. And so how you survive that and how you bring it back and you come face to face with death was I happy with what I had done, left behind? And since I didn't die, what am I going to be about going forward? Scott, let's hope that neither one of us have that kind of experience in our life. But give us in a nutshell the piece that he had, his advice for transforming your life without going through a plane crash.
Well, that's just it, right? The big idea in this story, the transformational insight is, so we hope we don't fall from the sky in our chair, bounce off the roof of a building onto the front of a car on fire.
Still strapped in to his
right.
plane seat.
Yeah. The book is worth reading just for his story. His insight is first for a reason, right? Is to say, let's hope we don't have that kind of event that makes us take stock of our lives. You know, what's interesting is the story that I wrote in the book after I told his story. Is I wrote a story about my son, my oldest son, Thatcher, who was 12. He was doing an exercise at school, talk about our family traditions. And I looked at his little report, and his traditions were something like, we go to church, we go to brunch, and we watch movies.
Brunch.
And I said, those aren't traditions. Those are like activities. And it had Zafar Massoud's survival from this plane crash in Pakistan. He was and is still the bank of the CEO of the Bank of Punjab, a large bank in Pakistan. And he really got me thinking around, so what's next for me? Like, what's my legacy? What's my mission? And why? Asking myself why. And I realized that one of the answers was I'm obviously parenting these three children with my wife, Stephanie, and that I want to make sure I launch these young gentlemen into the world as happy and healthy and productive and contributing gentlemen as much as possible. And I thought, I've got to.
And they're all mini Scots.
They are, to my wife's horror.
Seriously,
to my wife's horror.
And you dress them all the same. They're like all clones of you.
It's true. That's ending though. The oldest one's resisting the Ralph Lauren popped collar and the collared shoes. Anyway, I realized those were activities. Those weren't traditions. Going to church, going to brunch, watching movies. So my wife and I have been on the hunt for a cabin where we can actually install a zip line and catch fireflies and have fun and not just be on the go, go, go. You know, I interviewed Deepak Chopra recently. He's in Master Mentors Volume 4. And he reminded me, Mary, something you know that I'm trying to learn to manifest is there are human beings and there are human doings. And I am very much a human doing. And it took Deepak Chopra, the famous physician and author and speaker, to remind me I need to spend more time being a human being and less time being a human doing. And in many ways, that's kind of Zafar's insight is, so what now? Yeah. Can you avoid having this life-changing event? Hopefully you survive it, to put your priorities in place. And so I think my priorities have been in place, but I've become more thoughtful around, so what is next for me today, tomorrow, next week? And how do I build an environment where these three boys really feel loved and empowered and coached and backed? And a cabin isn't the answer, but it is an area in which we can build traditions around.
Yeah. It's where that can happen. You're thinking about how to build the platform where that happens. I love that. You know, Scott, I recently gave a podcast on my own about my journey to love, my spiritual journey. And that was one of the very things I talked about. I said, you know, for so many years, I thought my way to heaven, my stairway, was my checklist. Check, check, I did this, and check, check, I did that, and check, check. And finally, I realized I was doing all these things, but I hadn't been changing my heart. And I used that exact thing, that we are not human doings, we're human beings. And the process then that I went through to really change my heart. And I love that that's the lesson that you took from one of your master mentors. Another one of my favorite ones, sorry, I'm going to do
I don't know who it's going to be.
Was Bobby Herrera.
I'm so glad you picked him.
When I saw that, I was like, yes! It's because I probably talk more about this on my podcast than any other single thing, and that is the gift of struggle. Yeah. We see struggle as what we have to get through to get to the good stuff, but the good stuff comes because of the struggle. And okay, I'm going to be 69 next week, and I've got some inflammation
good,
in my knee, and I woke up this morning thinking, When did that decide to happen? Is there a clock that's ticking that says, now you're going to have inflammation to deal with in your life, and how are you going to do with that? Blah blah blah. I had a little bit of a moment where I was like, I hate this struggle, and I thought, wait, the gift of struggle.
Yeah.
How am I going to turn that into my next transformative move in my life?
Can I talk about that? So, by the way, Bobby Herrera.
Yeah, so
Bobby Herrera is Master Mentor number 32. He will be at the launch party in Salt Lake City on October 4th.
Really?
So if you come, he'll be
so
there.
Excited. I'm going to be there.
At Osteria Amore. All your guests are welcome to come. We'll see you October 4th at Osteria Amore in Salt Lake by the Capitol, by the U. Bobby Herrera, Latino, born in Mexico, raised in Texas, one of, I think, like 8 or 9 kids. And he now has become a very successful entrepreneur and author. He wrote a book called The Gift of Struggle. It's a small book. It's a beautiful book. The insight in the story that I share comes from a high school experience he had. He was a football player in high school with his brother. And every Friday night when the high school football team would board the bus after the win or the loss back to the school, it would stop at a local restaurant. And everybody would come off the bus and they would go in to have dinner, except for Bobby Herrera and his brother, who stayed on the bus because there was no money for Sizzler. They weren't going to Ruth's Chris, they were going to the Sizzler. And Bobby and his brother just knew they couldn't afford both football equipment and dinner, so their mother packed them a lunch every night, or every practice or game night, and they stayed on the bus. Well, one night, as Bobby and his brothers, I'm getting chills telling this story, we're sitting on the bus. I might cry.
I'm getting chills just remembering.
I always cry telling
this
story because it's so powerful. Bobby and his brother were sitting on the bus, and one of the fathers walked back on the bus and said, "Hey guys, I'd like you to be my guest at dinner tonight. No one needs to know. I'm going to pay for your dinner. Come and join us. And all I ask in return is that you pay it forward to somebody else later in life." And it was that day that Bobby Herrera said it was the first time he ever felt seen by someone else in his life. He had no plan for his life. He couldn't see like 2 feet in front of him. And in high school, this gentleman got back on the bus and said, "Come on, I'm going to buy your dinner." It was the first time Bobby had ever felt seen by someone. Fast forward 35 years, Bobby becomes this very successful entrepreneur, writes this best-selling book called The Gift of Struggle. He launches the book. He finds the man from 30 years ago. His name was Harold T.
I love that part of the story.
And he invites him back to the dinner. He tells the story. Everyone gives him a standing ovation. But this isn't where the story ends. Several days or weeks later, the guy calls up Bobby and said, "I had no idea. I remember coming on the bus. I remember this. I had no idea the impact that this had on your life." And the point of the story really is just, who are you making feel seen today? Who will you make feel seen? Whether you are a leader, a mentor, a parent, a neighbor, whether you have no money or no positional power or no title in the world, the power of making someone feel seen is of massive consequence. The story is powerful. He's going to be live at the event. We have some special things planned. But it has changed my perspective on how can I use my success, my perceived intellect, my stories, my books, my podcast, my network to perhaps help people who don't feel seen, be seen. That's it.
When I read that chapter, I was so touched and moved by that, and the acknowledgement of that he gave back to that coach. It was an incredible opportunity for me to take a look. I recently spoke at a second time at a group of women. There are only 20 of them. And sometimes I think, okay, I have to go do this. 20 women. I get in front of myself, but I went because I do love these women. And it was my second time there. And as I spoke, and I have them sit in a circle since there's so few of them, and we can share and talk more, and they get to ask a lot of questions. But as they went around, the second person that spoke said, I was here the last time you were here. And you changed my life
I believe it.
forever because you saw me. And then to have every single one of them after that, you changed my life because of the way you held me. And I'd never been held with so much love in my life. And we sometimes don't know. I was blessed to go back and have that experience where they actually talk to me. Sometimes we don't know. Maybe you helped someone and you will never know. But by living our life in that space of looking outward and up, not just in front and down, it transforms our personal lives and the lives of so many others where we drop the pebble in the ripple.
I'm going to add to that because I'm going to pay you another compliment. I don't know what you're going to speak about yet on the podcast that I host, and I'm not sure yet what I will feature about you in Master Mentors Volume 4. But here's what I can tell your listeners about you is you are one of the most present people in my life. You're not on your phone. You're not rooting around talking to multiple people. When you are talking with someone, it's as if they are the only person in your world. It's a discipline. This isn't like just probably who you are naturally. I think you've likely become this. It takes a discipline to intentionally, intellectually check into that person, to put away the American Express bill and your upgrade on Delta and the next hike and what's for dinner tomorrow and how's the business. You put that aside and the power of focus. It's a habit you build the muscle in.
Yeah.
And I think one of the greatest gifts you give people in making them feel seen is you check in. That requires you then to check out of other things. And right now, that's a competency and an onslaught of distractions and information and emotions and politics and mask or don't mask or pandemics or, you name it, or back to school, all of it. You have developed a really replicable ability, which is to make people feel seen in your presence. And I say replicable because all of us can do that if we care enough. You just happen to care enough. I think it's a differentiator.
I remember very clearly that when that switched for me, when I would go to networking events, that's where I honed this skill. Because you want to touch and talk to as many people as you can and influence and all those kind of things, be, the hub. And I found myself looking past people at the next person that I would go to. And I'd scan the room. And even though you come right back, that energy is palpable. They can tell that you're looking past them. And when you've had that experience happen to you, I've had it happen to me where people were looking past me. And one time I literally just stepped aside. I said, "Oh, excuse me." I stepped aside. I said, "Who's ever back there will be more important to you, maybe." And they just stopped. And they said, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, "What was the last thing I was saying to you?" They had no idea. And it was a huge wake-up call for them and for me because I saw in them what I was doing in myself. And I thought, never again. People who are in front of me will know that I see them and that no one else matters at that moment.
This is a transformational insight. All the listeners, this is what I'd like to write about in Master Mentors Volume 4 when I feature Mary, because this is a truth bomb right now, right? Is having that discipline to create the focus and the empathy to be checked into the person that you're talking about. It's tough. It's tough, right? Because listening is hard.
Yeah.
Paying attention is hard right now. All of us have some kind of attention deficit, diagnosed or not, in 2022 with the onslaught, the attack of information coming at us, both consciously and unconsciously. Mary, I think you serve as an extraordinary model. Maybe part of it's because your kids are launched. Maybe part of it's because the business is on its own. I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to take away that power, but
it's a process, though. It is a process. You don't just all of a sudden, grow up, graduate from high school and then college and then start a business and presto changeo, you're now this new person. Thank heavens it's a process. Like I mentioned before, I'm 69. This isn't my last year of growth. I'm going to be a better person next year than I am today. And I'm going to live to be 105. I've got a lot of years of growth yet. This is just tip of the iceberg for me, even at this age.
We're talking today with Mary Crafts, Master Mentor number 91 on episode 260 of the On Leadership podcast. Look for Mary Crafts and Master Mentor volume number 4.
All right, I'm out of time. I'm not going to be able to talk to you about Guy Kawasaki. But I love that because you're right. He had a buffet of good advice. Okay, so I tend to read things well that are done in lists. So there's like a subject and then he writes about it, and then a subject and then he writes and subject. So I can skim the list and see which one strikes me that day as appropriate to me. I like that. In fact, I thought I'm going to apply that principle in my next book. But anyway, so I kind of looked down here, and some of the things that happened to me that as I read this, okay, I liked this one. Maybe the pasture isn't always greener. And I thought, well, I understand that principle. The pasture actually is never greener, but we jump to it because, like marriages or anything else, or businesses, or, using a handyman. Well, the next guy's handyman must be better than mine, rather than talking and communicating to your handyman, or whatever the situation is. And when I read that, I thought about how that applied to my life. And I thought, this is like jumping ship rather than working on the ship. This is like, do I have the patience, the time, the talent on my own to build something rather than throw it away and jump into something else? And as I counsel people, I know this sounds crazy that I'm counseling people on marriage and divorce, but I do. But it's one of the things I say the most. Don't just come to me and ask me the question, well, how did you survive after divorce? Let's talk about your marriage now. And how do you make that decision? And at what point did you decide to stop loving that person and let go of them? And rather than pulling them in and embracing them, that principle is such a great principle to give the value of grit and commitment and resilience. Okay, but anyway, time is short. Scott, I'm going to talk about this last guy that I really want to talk to. I think he's your favorite. Ed
Milet.
Okay,
did you read the whole story on that one?
Oh yeah. So I laughed because the title of his chapter is "What's Your Kit Car?" And as I read that, I just laughed because this is a guy who went out and bought a Mercedes-Benz kit and it put it on a Chrysler LeBaron car so he could appear that he was, more successful than he was. And when you actually talked about the headlights were Velcroed on and he'd stop and the headlight would roll out. I thought, okay, this is hilarious, but so profound in its way. So this is how it's profound for me. And then I have a question for you. For many years, I did the fake it till you make it and pretended that I didn't live in Spanish Fork. I had a Salt Lake number, so when my Salt Lake and Park City clients would call me, they thought they were calling Salt Lake. Okay? I faked it till I made it. I was in business probably 15 years before I woke up one day and said, I think I know what I'm doing. I think I really do good at this. I think I've got this. And then 20 more years, I got to live that life. But that's a fake it till you make it. And then when you do, you wake up. But the other piece of his story was the imposter syndrome that some people never wake up from. And they feel that they have to fake it their whole life. I had a dream after I graduated from college for years that they came and took my degree. I didn't warrant it, I never went to class. I never did anything, I just messed around and had fun, went to choir. That was about it. But that imposter syndrome, I talk about it actually in my book as well. When you get to see through the mask, looking the other direction. And you realize as you look back through the mask that we have put up for other people to look at, that the best mask you've got is your own. And that when you break that away, this is what you get. I'm the best version of me there has ever been in 69 years, right here. right now. I don't need to pretend to be anybody else. So tell me about your lessons and what you got from interviewing this master.
I was enjoying listening to you. Ed Milet
Yeah.
is one of the biggest names in thought leadership, authorship, podcasting. If you're not following Ed
Yeah.
Milet, Mylett, Google him and get on his train because he's remarkable, generous, kind. You look at him, he looks like, like a New Jersey weightlifter. He's the sweetest, most tenderest, thoughtful guy
You
ever.
have a picture of
Yeah.
him. And when I read your the introduction when you talked about him, I didn't expect him to look like
Yes.
this.
Oh,
But
yeah, he's
I don't know if you can
he's
see
as
this, but
yeah.
he looks like somebody I'd see at
It's
the
totally
gym.
true, and he's
you
also
know?
super buff. But he's for those of you, some of you may know who Ed is, right? Ed's got a massive podcast and blog. Anyway, Ed shares this story. Ed and I spoke on stage together 3 years ago in front of about 7,000 people at Rachel Hollis's Rise event, and Ed, I didn't know who he was, and he's telling this remarkably funny story of how he was early in life, like a sales leader, and he so wanted a Mercedes-Benz, but he found one down in Orange County, California, that had been Velcroed onto the frame of a Chrysler LeBaron. It's called a kit car. They actually existed back then. The problem was all the stuff was Velcroed on. The doors, the hood, the headlights. Whenever he would stop too fast at an intersection, the stuff would pop off. Well, long story short, he was trying to impress all his salespeople. So he said that he, in fact, had the first ever hybrid car from Mercedes and Chrysler, because thank God Chrysler and Mercedes had merged that year so he could pull it off that it was their first ever hybrid car. Not hybrid engine, hybrid body. The story is riotous. You have to read it in the book. Hearing him, watching him share it on the podcast is even funnier. The point is, the moral of the story is, what's Velcroed together in your life? What area code are you pretending is your residence? Salt Lake versus Spanish Fork. We all have that going on. It doesn't mean it's bad or good. You be the judge of your own journey as well. I've done lots of things. I was wearing cufflinks and wingtip shoes long before I could actually close any kind of client deal, right? So you hear people talk about fake it till you make it, and people say it's a horrible thing to do, and people say imposter syndrome is bad. Everybody's an imposter early on in their career. You have no idea what you're doing early on.
To some extent, you're absolutely
Just
right.
own it. If someone says, do you have imposter syndrome? Say, of course I do. I'm just learning how to do this. Yes, I'm a total imposter. I'm actually quite comfortable embracing.
But I think one of the best examples of that in my life are sunglasses and purses. Because you can buy a pair of designer sunglasses with that big Gucci logo on the side for $400, okay? And if you get on a cheap site, you can buy them maybe for $250, and they're new. And you can get the case out of your purse, clean them, buff them, put them on, and voila, suddenly you're, the Gucci family yourself. And I tell you, the purses, also same thing. For a fairly affordable price, you can buy a designer purse where you couldn't dress from head to toe. But how do they know that these clothes came from Nordstrom Rack? And all those other things, because the rest of you looks all put together. All of the rest of that must be. It is that thing that we do until now. You know what happened to me this last year was I said to myself, it's really hard to be Mary Crafts. All those 20 purses that hang by the back door that I decide every single day and then change and put them in different purses. And I go through my sunglasses. This pair today. These are my 100 pair of shoes. This shoe. Like, it's not easy to be me. And what else could I do in my life if that no longer was the predominant thought process before I stepped out? And I began to have time to meditate and to take care of myself and to put me first. And I can tell you this, the one thing I've learned is that yes, we all go through fake it till you make it. We all go through the imposter syndrome. But in the end, what steps out that door that gets people noticed is your energy. When I walk into a room, if I have not one designer thing on and I'm just there in my jeans and a t-shirt, the way we think of ourselves and how we carry ourselves grants you way more attention than your foster grants.
See, this is why it's called the Mary Craft Show. Well said. Well said. And I'll tell you, I feel better when I get in my Mercedes than when I don't. All things in moderation, right? I mean, knowing who you are and understanding all of that, I think, is key to just showing up, like you said. Great story.
Scott, our time is like long since over. In fact, like double what I normally do. But I was so thrilled with your book. And it's your first one of your books that I've read cover to cover. The other ones I skim, I get ready for, talk this, go to your launch party, blah, blah. But I was changed. And what I want to know, from writing this book, how were you changed?
Well, in many ways. I know our time is tight. I continue to know when you think you know it all, you're dead. And so like you, I am on a constant, voracious reading schedule, learning, listening, subscribing, challenging my paradigm, changing my mind. Most of us say, oh, we've got 30 years of experience. No, most of us have 1 year of experience repeated 29 times. And so I'm really trying out of these books to absorb these transformational insights and really asking myself, what's next for me? Who am I making feel seen? I'm trying to live these principles in every facet that I can. So I think for me, it's just being a sponge and recognizing that, like you said, we're kind of the collection of the 5 people in our life. Well, I'm going to be the collection of the 300 people, 30 per book with 10 volumes, 300 master mentors, of which Mary Crafts will be master mentor number 91 in volume 4. So stand by.
Scott, I love that mindset. And that's why you and I are such good friends, is that we see life as a buffet, as a gift to be given to us, and a gift for us to pick up and use and love and to share. And we have the same energy. Maybe, and I think maybe Stephanie knows that. Maybe that's why she likes me. Because when the two of you are in the room, it's like, ah!
Yeah, but the difference between you and me is I'm looking over your shoulder to the next person and you're staring intently at me. Right. Inspiring me to check back in. I have a lot to learn from you, Master Mentor Mary Crafts.
So at the end of this podcast, you all will see the links to Scott's podcast. And Scott, is this book available for sale right now on Amazon?
Yes. It's available on pre-order on all the sites in Amazon. It releases October 4th. Okay. And if you want to meet Bobby Herrera, we'll see you at the launch party on October 4th.
And me, and you.
And Mary will be there with her traveling companion. The most... You've done well in this sidekick you have, this beau of yours, because I see him on countless events. He has a tiger by the tail, just John does.
Yeah. And it was interesting yesterday. He was down here. We were making dinner for my family on Sunday. And he just does little things, kind of does what he's told. But then it came to getting ready to hook up this podcast equipment for tomorrow because I have a new thing. And he was telling me, no, that goes in here. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. It goes in here. And we just kept going back and forth. And finally he said, so what do we do when we 2 A personalities come together and you have a disagreement? That was the first time I realized, okay, let's talk about that. So we sat right down and we just came up with this solution. Well, first let's try your way and then let's try my way. And we'll see which one works best. Brilliant.
So who was right? He was right.
So, it's a very humbling very good, John. Very
Honored
good
to be here. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Scott. Oh, I love you. I love your family. And I love all the beautiful insights that you bring to our planet. It's about oneness, and we're going to get there together. Thank you for crafting your meaningful life with me today. Namaste.
Listen to the full podcast today and subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and more. Crafting a Meaningful Life with Mary Crafts.